So this is my first computer. So I got the gift from the present from my dad, 1983. 1983. It was really expensive at the time. Even at the time, it is like the 2,000 US dollar. 2,000 US dollar in the 1983 is like the almost 2-3 months salary, full salary, I believe. So even more than that, 2,000 US dollar. I still don't understand why my dad, gave the computer. Even he was not the engineer. He was actually the work for the bank. It looks like one of his customer has a business about this. So he need to buy from his customer. Anyway, it was a really expensive one, but you can see the memory size of 4 KB RAM. So some of the XT computer, you need to actually, do you know the floppy disk? Oh, really? Which means you are pretty much old. Really, when I asked to the undergraduate student, most of them do not know the floppy disk drive. Most of them do not know. So, but to start the computer, actually, which means to load the operating system, I need to put the floppy disk because it has a very, very small RAM size, like less than 1 megabyte, okay? And then hard disk drive, the 20 megabyte. So I need to use the cassette tape. Even. Do you know the cassette tape?
Yes.
Sony Walkman, like that, which means that you are pretty much old. So even we can use the magnetic cassette tape as a storage. So if you play it's like the beeping sound a lot. So, but it is possible because as long as we can store the 0 or 1, we can store any digital, the data. Okay. So these are all the personal computer 19, but nowadays I'm using the Surface Pro, which I really hate, but no choice. I need to use the department will purchase the new one. So I'm not a big fan of the MacBook, so I have, but I usually do not use. So, but the MacBook is, in terms of operating system concept, is better than the Windows because it is part of them is from the BSD, the Unix. So it's more like I prefer the terminal, the interface. But anyway, you can compare the hard disk drive size. So it's from the 20 megabyte to the 256 gigabyte. But I know that some of you guys have the terabyte size, the hard disk drive. And your memory size, mine is 8 gigabyte. The Murari has 32 gigabyte. It's huge. So that is the difference. So which means our data size is 30 years ago. It's around maximum 20 megabyte. Even hard disk drive size 20 megabyte. But now each of them, I think right now is already full. So 95%. So I'm using the SD card, the 256 gigabyte SD card as the external storage. So which means each of them at least have the half terabyte size of data. What if combining all of these data together? It's huge. So that means nowadays we are living in the big data. So it's not only from the government, it's not only from the big company like the Facebook, the big data comes from even the individual. So that is the difference. How much big? So you can imagine what is the megabyte and even gigabyte size. So gigabyte is the megabyte is usually the high quality, high resolution, the images. If you take the photo, it's 8 megabyte nowadays, 4 to 8 megabyte, right? So then, if you download the illegally movie, it's around 1 gigabyte, right? So if you are using the 360 p, that is around the 600 megabyte, but if you download the high quality, the 1080p, so maybe it's a 4 gigabyte. Right? How do you know that? Is it illegal or legal if you download the movie from torrent, then watch? If you watch individually, it's not it's legal, okay? But if you share if you broadcast, if you show in the like me, here, but it's a clip, so it's okay. But if you share your display, that will be illegal. So if individually you can watch, okay? Don't worry about too much, even though you illegally don't. That doesn't mean that you can do that. So, but I know, so sometimes there's no way to watch the movie that is the release in my hometown. Right? So there is a gigabyte, and nowadays most of the computer has a terabyte size hard disk drive. Then from the petabyte is very hard. So when I manage the database, so by combining all I had when I left the company is 2001. So I managed around 30 database instances. By combining all of them is less than the terabyte. Even I didn't think about the terabyte at the time. The biggest storage box was the 36 gigabyte. Actually 72 gigabyte, but the half is mirrored, so only 36 gigabyte. Then the price of that, the storage is I think the 5 or 6 times of my yearly salary at the time. Only the 36 gigabyte. Then nowadays many of even the small company has the petabyte size. Petabyte is 1,000 terabyte. So for example, if I combining all of the student, the personal computer, their storage, maybe it's bigger than the petabyte size. So, however, one of the problem of managing the data, like using the relational database, the management system, Oracle, Informix, DB2, they can manage up to the several petabyte size. If the data size is bigger than the petabyte size, it's very hard. So which very hard means you need to have the more CPU, and the bigger size memory is more expensive. And you cannot get enough performance. So that is the problem. So up to the petabyte size, the legacy system, traditional system can handle. However, the bigger than this, like the 1,000 of petabyte size, exabyte, and zettabyte, even very hard to imagine what is a zettabyte, then no way to manage such a huge amount of data. So like nowadays we have the big company, the Google, Facebook, Twitter, every day like the YouTube. So every day they have the several petabyte size the new data. So using traditional the system and the file system, you cannot manage. Obviously, that is the idea of the big data system. Okay, so if you cannot imagine what is a really big data, like I'm not sure whether you can do. There's no way to represent the terabyte, but let's say that this small dot is a petabyte, and this is a zettabyte. So nowadays, if we combine all of the digital media data altogether, it's a zettabyte size. So it's like this increase, but it's more steep nowadays. So this is just the expectation, but I think there's more than that. So big data solution is not optional, but most of the company, even I think the nearest, even personal computer, think about how to manage such the huge amount of data. But if you think about the capacity of the computing power, it's like not the exponentially increased drastically, but the size of the data is exponentially increased. So that is the gap. So that is the thing that we need to discuss throughout the semester. So it's everywhere. it's not only from the company like the YouTube and the other. So nowadays, when scientific data like the earthquake, the sciences, do you know which country is the most suffered from the earthquake?
Japan.
It's China. Actually, China. So Japan is the one of them, but if you consider the number of earthquake and number of victims, it's China, especially the south part of the China. So because Himalaya, then the mountain, and so they have more, and the higher, the more damage the earthquake. So they put a lot of money, we try to predict, and the early alarm system, they put a lot of sensor. So that the sensor generates a huge amount of the data from the earthquake. And the polar grid, and it's also the huge so scientific data also create a lot of the big data. And it is true, several years ago, during the Obama government, the Obama actually released a lot of the government data, including census data and economic data and everything. Then that sparked on the big data, the two boom of the economy and the industry, and released opened a lot of the government such a data. So we actually start to handle such the government the data as a big data. So that's another thing. And nowadays, if you think about if you consider your cell phone, your cell phone has the several gigabyte storage. I believe the half of them are images, photo. Okay, so it's not only from the radiology, but that is also the problem. Not problem, but that is the source of the big data. The individual create a lot of images every day. Even in the classroom, we videotape for the lecture. That is several gigabytes per day. Then where do we store? So right now we are using the YouTube. Then it's also another thing we need to consider. So individual the photo is so many of you guys are using the cloud to save your storage, but that is another thing. So there are the many sources of the big data. So okay, so this is just the introduction, and we will see what is really big data. So it is true. So I already briefly explained the mainframe, then the downsizing to the PC around the 1990, then around the 2000, as you know, there is a .com. It's a boom of the old, like the Java programming or the web pages, it's a .com. So then mostly they are connected, and also specifically the mobile computing, so it's a cell phone. So because of cell phone, so it's increased like this one. Then nowadays, it's everything connected. So it's called the IoT, Internet of Things, which means it's everything. Just nothing but everything is connected. So each of the device will generate the data. So we are interested in such a generated data. Okay. So data size. Later, this one is a gigabyte, and one of the characteristics of the big data is it was mostly structured data. That makes sense because at the time it's very limited to keep all the information. Instead, we try to organize. We want, so if you remember what you have done in the database design class, we try to organize something information, then to get the important information, then make the name, ID, and address. We decide this is the key, then use that key as a primary key to select the data. Why? Because it's limited. So we keep only such a structured data. Because it's limited. Even though when Dr. E.F. Codd proposed a relational database model, it's a very large data. At that time, very large means comparing to the computing power is very large. But nowadays, we don't have to worry about too much because we have pretty much enough space. So it's unstructured. Because of that, so think about the source of such a big data. So it's everywhere. So Some of them are structured, some of them are just a number, some of them are images or video. It's unstructured or semi-structured data. Okay? Then even nowadays, many of them are sensor data. Also, some of them embed the GPS location, so spatial data, and also time information. Even though you have the exactly same data, but it's generate a different time or different location, the meaning is the different. So we have such the spatial, and another the characteristic is it's a kind of streaming data. So every time, so this time we just organize this data daily or weekly based, then the process at night. However, nowadays it's 24 and 7 days a week, and so without the stopping, we receive the data every time, every moment. So it's called the streaming data and the real time. So how do we keep such a real time data? That is another point of the big data. So it is true nowadays we are living in the big data era. And if we think about processing the data, AI or machine learning, that's the kind of on top of the big data to process such a thing. So I started this lecture from the 2012. So at the time the wiki defined the big data as like this one, data set with a size beyond the ability of common use software to capture and so on. Nowadays, if you take a look at I just copy and paste from the wiki today, the definition of the big data is, it was in between the 2013, 14, 15, 16. So try to more characterize what is a really big data. But if you read this one, it's a general definition, which means we don't have to actually define what is a really big data. Instead, we try to understand the problem of the big data. Like that includes the capturing, the collecting, how to collect the data, and how to store the data. Analysis, searching, such a thing can be discussed other thing, but it's also starting from the big data problem. And visualization and the querying and the privacy is recently included. So these are the all aspects of the big data. But we can use the 3V the definition to understand the big data, like the volume in terms of volume, big, and the variety and the value. We will see each of them details. So nowadays the definition of the big data is go back to the beginning. It's the general definition, not very specific the definition. If you take a look at the old definition, okay. So from time to time, the Gartner defined the technology of the IT. So actually, the headquarters of the Gartner is in Stanford. So they provide something such as the definition or the report survey. So some of the students who graduate from our program, they work for the Gartner also. So they define the big data as a volume, velocity, variety. So already mentioned that here, we will see that later. Even the Oxford they have. But so it was my definition several years ago. So my definition is it's kind of big data. Can you see something? Some of them can realize, some of them not. So but inside there are something meaning. So my definition of the big data is the first, it's a really big data. How much big? It depends. Depends on the capacity of the. So for example, if we are considering our computer. So anyway, when we talk about the big data, that big data is in computer system. It's not the paperwork, it's not the analog data, it's the digital data, which means it's in a computer. So which means if the computer can manage your data, it's not really big. Okay? So if I can purchase, if I can develop the really fast CPU and the really big memory and the overall computing architecture process the zettabyte data at one time, so it's not a really big data. So considering the computing power, whether we can afford such a size of the data, so that determines whether we are dealing with the big data or not. So then, another important thing is from the big data, the more important thing is after we are able to process such a manage and store and process the big data, whether we can utilize such a big data or not. So when we have the small amount of data, that's just the information. It doesn't give any specific or the benefit. But if we can process the big data, sometimes, not always, sometimes we can find such the meaningful information. So that is the value of the big data. So my definition of the big data is first, big data is the considering computing power, we have the bigger size than what the computer, my computer or our computer can handle. Then whether we can get the meaningful information. So whether we can support later the AI or machine learning or the data analytics. That is the reason I put the title of this class, Big Data and the Data Analytics. But the analytics part is getting more important nowadays. So I'd like to set aside many of them to the data mining class or the deep learning class. So then we can focus on whether we are dealing with the big data and whether we can process such a big data. Okay? First, we'd like to see the characteristic of the big data. Okay, let's have the 10-minute break, then we will continue.